I'm really excited to have Marc Prensky with us. Mark, I've been a big admirer of yours for many, many years. I think probably since the turn of the century. But for those of you who don't in the audience, I can't imagine any of you in this audience not knowing who Mark is. But he's the genius who coined the terms digital native and digital immigrant, and helped us frame, how we're going to educate the next generation of soldiers and people who work in our businesses and that sort of thing. He's written a bunch of books, and has just been a great thinker. And throughout the years, even on this stage, you guys have seen me bring up his little references to the difference between digital immigrants and digital natives, and what that means, and that sort of thing. But I want to talk about Mark, and Mark's on the left coast now, just back from Spain, and overcoming the sort of jet lag from that travel. Unfortunately, can't be with us today, but we're going to talk about this book, Empowered. I see you've got it up there on your screen too. You and I just reconnected right during COVID while you were writing this book, and talked a lot about a lot of these ideas. But just tell me what, after all the other stuff you've done about education to better their world, unleashing the power of 21st century kids, and the 2 Billion Kids Project and all that, but what really motivated you to write this book?
Thanks, Richard. The thinking that went into this book, which came over a long period of time gradually, is that we are moving into such a different world that we need to grow up in a different way to prepare for that world. And I call that way growing up empowered. And it means that parenting has to switch from ownership to curation. It means that the years that we used to do education need to switch from education to accomplishment. And it means that when we go to work, we need to think about having unique value add that makes us and the world a better place. So those are all pieces that somehow came together. And the theme, I guess, overall is from control, which is what we did with kids, putting things into their heads to control them as parents, as culture, as school, to bringing things out,
Mm.
to bringing things out to what I call empowerment.
No, I know that. So years ago, I think you had me read this, or it might have been you or Alan Kay, "The End of Education" by Neil Postman. Talking about how we need to reframe education, and that's what you've done. You reframed all of us with the concept of digital natives and digital immigrants, and now we're reframing again. But what do we need to do? What are some steps we can take in education policy and structure right now, especially coming out of COVID, that can help this next generation of leaders?
Well, thank you for bringing up Postman. I haven't read that book in a very long time, and I'm going to go back and read it right after this and see what he said. Here's what I've found. Education was a very, very important thing through the 20th century. We didn't have much access to information, to knowledge. We needed teachers, we needed guides, we needed all these things. And so education was enormously important. And anybody from the 20th century will tell you that. And you have Nelson Mandela, who said it's the greatest weapon we can use to change the world. Well, that was then, and this is now. And what suddenly happened is that young people have become empowered in two ways. They've acquired these enormous tools. They have this device with them that by the time they grow up will be 1,000,000,000 times more powerful. And so they can do things with that if they choose. And second, they have an attitude which is very different from the past, which is, I can. Don't tell me I can't, because I can. And those two things together, the fact that they can and they want to, and they have the capabilities, are going to make for a very, very different world and require a different way of growing up.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know we've talked about this a lot, but I just feel that I felt like almost when I was going through education, K through 12 especially, I felt like I actually had more agency than I sometimes see in public education today. And even with parenting today, we're putting all these protective bubbles around our children. They can't leave the yard without a helmet and without shoulder pads and elbow pads and that sort of thing. When what you want is for children to go out and build resiliency. And for me, I just like it to just whatever you want to say about how resiliency builds into empowerment. Like, are we overprotecting our kids today? And how do we build resiliency into dealing with like the next pandemic or the next, war that we might have to encounter?
Well, we may have had more freedom in when I grew up. I can't speak for you, but when I grew up, there were only 2 billion people in the world. Now there are 4 times as many people in the world, and there are actually 2 billion young people in the world. So that's really different. But we couldn't really accomplish much. We may have thought we could do some things, and we may have broken out of some barriers. But here's my favorite example is Greta Thunberg. And so Greta Thunberg is a person with lots of passion, and she's got very good ideas about what she wants to accomplish, but she does very little. She started out protesting like we did in the 60s with signs in front of the parliament. She spoke to the UN, and that didn't do a whole lot. And she started organizing these strikes on Fridays. But if she used the power of technology like Elon Musk uses the power of technology, she could contact every young person in the world online and say something like, we're not going back to school. Let's go on strike until something happens in the climate arena. This is huge. The connection, the power of this connection is so untapped. And most of the young people don't realize yet that they have it because adults spend so much time either tamping it down or exploiting it through online stuff. And that's really, I want to see our young people grow up with the model of Elon Musk on the one hand, of what you can do if you just dream and want to do this, combined with Mahatma Gandhi on the other hand, who says, yes, and we have to be good and moral and really make a better world. So I would love to see that change happening. And what I see is that education by itself is not going to get us there. We have, everybody knows the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Those are really our generation's epic fails. We don't have clean water, we don't have equality, we don't have all these things, and yet we've had education for a very long time. Education by itself doesn't cut it. We need empowerment, we need accomplishment. And that is something that young people can now do. So whether it comes side by side with education, alongside, and I'm trying to create empowerment hubs where that could happen, but lots of them exist. I think there's going to be a gradual 20-year shift, generational shift from education being important for growing up to accomplishment and empowerment being important for growing up.
Interesting. Yeah, that was our friends David Weinberger and Doc Searles and all those folks who created the Clue Train Manifesto when the graphical internet was born in by I think 1993 or 4, right? That was
Yeah.
the idea. We were going to super empower everybody to be more connected than we've ever been before, more connected to information than we've ever been before. But as you and I have discussed, it seems like over the last decade we've made billionaires out of just monetizing human attention the way we did with ABC and NBC and CBS commercials in the last century, instead of really, engaging and empowering people. And now, just to make this segue, because that's our topic for this simulation century, we're talking about what does simulation in the age of the metaverse mean? This concept that's been around for a long time. So, what is an empowered? How do we create a truly empowered, networked metaverse today?
Well, as you showed me that question in advance, I thought about it and I said, what is an empowering universe? it's being metaverse, whatever we want to call it, it's being able to do something that's meaningful to you that improves lives and improves the world in some way, because you need both of those. If you're in Ready Player One and living in those horrible, stacked trailer parks, that's not really improving life, even though it seems good when you're in the metaverse. But it can do. Obviously, it can simulation can prepare you for things that we've known for a very long time, uh, but it also can show you what some alternatives are and what you could do that you may not have realized you could do in advance. And you can feel, if it does well, it lets you feel your power, not participate in something, not feel good only, all these things. But it really, it's like, I guess the metaphor for me is Ender's Game, that you think you're playing a game, but you're actually saving the world.
Or
And
having an effect in the real world. Yeah.
that's really what I wanted to be about.
Oh, thanks for bringing up Ready Player One. By the way, this is my, I don't know if you saw it on the wall behind me. That's my meta Easter egg for my Zoom calls. That's me with Warren Robinette, another friend of mine, and I know you know him as well. We
Mm-hmm.
have that idea of the Easter egg that was in the movie. So that's me with him in the picture behind us. But yeah, so that's we're going to talk about the metaverse a lot here today at this and over the next couple of days at Modsim World. NVIDIA's here with their Omniverse and doing some great work promoting that. And I'm cautiously optimistic about where we're headed, but it feels to me like VR once again. Like I've been through so many of these, like let's go build this all empowering, connected, simulated world. But I keep seeing people creating these little walled gardens instead. And what I always try to remind people when I get the stage at all to talk about this is that it's first of all should be about communication, right? That we're talking to, like, if you don't enable really fluid and fluent communication with other people, then and you've put walls up and barriers up, then you've kind of broken rule one of the empowering metaverse. And then it's about all the other media types. I love the fact, as a guy who's worked in 3D gaming, the idea we can make these simulated worlds where people can practice and experience the Battle of Agincourt and go inside the human body and go to the surface of Mars and have these experiences. But they're not easy to build, and we've got to make sure that the friction isn't there that prevents people from having this true collaboration.
Well,
Let's
here's
just
one
talk
thing.
about,
I just looked down at my notes, and let me
please.
add one word into this thing, which is adding value, and that is the part that's often missing. It's how do we use these new parts of our being, new worlds we can live in, to add value to each other, to humanity, to what we're doing. If we're not doing that, I don't think we're going as far as we can.
Yeah, and I think that's the other piece that simulation helps us with is just systems thinking or system of systems thinking. One of the panelists that you'll see right after this discussion is my friend Dr. Anil Menon with ShareCare. He's also with the World Bank and other organizations. But what he's trying to do is capture the work that Meta or Facebook or Meta is doing, and actually let's model out communities and cities and towns and then try to look at the effect of policies and investments down the road. What are the second, third, and fourth order consequences of those investments, like Build Back Better or any other policy you have you want to implement, and like run that simulation first before we go do these policy changes.
I mean,
So
we should have run a Supreme Court simulation of what they might do.
yeah, I mean, I know that people are very passionate about this subject, and we try not to get political on this, on this stage. But I mean, I think it is a time and an era. That's why I call this the simulation century. The last century was about the televised image. That's when we could review what's going on in the Vietnam War or anything else that we're doing in societies around the world by reviewing footage of it. First time in human history when we could finally do that. Now we've got these super empowering tools like the ability to build a world, put all the elements and dimensions of that world in it, and simulate the outcomes, and then see, like, should we do that thing or not? And the data should speak for itself rather than opinion. And if you run those data simulations, you see that, overturning Roe versus Wade is going to have some really, what do they say? Like the intentional consequences don't always happen, but the unintentional ones always do. So I don't know what's going to happen there, but
I
simulation,
think
it
the
seems
big
like an
question,
underused tool, doesn't it?
I think the big question is to what end we're doing this stuff. And you can look at Minecraft, for example, and see the incredible worlds that people are building now and they're putting together. But to what end? Is the world that we live in improving as a result of this? And if we don't see that in whatever direction we think is improvement, and clearly we don't all agree on what that direction is, but if we don't see the world going in the directions that we would like it to go as a result of what we're doing, then we're not using the full power of these tools, in my view. Or I don't even call them tools, I call them new parts of our body.
Yeah, new exo, as William Gibson calls them, exocortical extensions of ourselves, right?
Yes, that's a good word.
So inevitably, and I know I felt bad even asking you this question or asking it now, but we have to touch on blockchain and NFTs. They're all the rage. Everybody's talking about it, but how do we? Is the true promise of blockchain going to become a reality where we actually create an unimpeded, frictionless economy from new currencies, or is it truly going to end up being Ponzi schemes and pyramid schemes all the way down? What do you think about these things?
One of my favorite authors is Harari, and Yuval Noah Harari. And what he talks about are shared myths. And none of this stuff has any value or meaning in and of itself. It's because we share the belief that it has meaning. And so if everybody in the world thought that the right currency and the thing that had meaning was the Bitcoin, for example, that would be fine. But that's not currently the way it is. And currently, a lot of people have thought that the myth is that if you have a country or you have something with a lot of value backing this up, that will be better. I think the jury is out on this, but I think that it's a question of what humanity will believe in the future. It's not even what is, because it's all there. It's a question of what we believe and have faith in collectively.
I think it's interesting that you and I have both been interviewed about these subjects, and I just had a interview in Muscle and Health magazine of all places. But they have 4 million readers, right? So an audience, my publicist says, "Hey, they have 4 million readers. Let's talk to them." But I did an interview where I talked about blockchain and NFTs, but I talked about the positives and the negatives. And of course, what did they print? Just the positives. They didn't talk about any of the things that I said were things we should be watching out for, which is this: it's just another fiat currency that is not tied to anything in the real world, that could be manipulated by people and is subject to corruption. So one of the things I do like though is, and I have my own crypto wallet and I've got some NFTs that are tied to things in the real world, like real estate or fractional ownership of real estate, something that I can exchange. And the thing I do like about blockchains is the idea of smart contracts that govern, like the idea of DAOs or decentralized authority organizations, that there's no president, CEO, operating officer, CFO, any of that stuff. It's all governed by the actual AI and its rules. And that there's no the regulators don't like it because there's no neck to wring, but the idea of like doing something simple like owning property and renting it out to other people like VRBO or things like that, and having fractional ownership there where we don't have all these intermediaries taking a cut all the way through. I get that totally. And I'm a gold standard guy. Back when you could exchange a dollar bill for a piece of gold, I get that. Even though gold is also an agreement, right? Anyway,
But
we could go down this rabbit hole like you and I always do, but
but here's the underlying thing, and you mentioned it a number of times. The underlying issue is ownership. The underlying issue is, do we allow, whether it's through NFTs or anything like this, do we allow ownership? Do we allow those rich people in the world, we all know who they are, to own as much of the wealth of the world and therefore control as much of the wealth of the world as they do. And we see with Uber, for example, nobody owns a car anymore. You don't have to, I don't, you don't have to own a car. Ownership has been a huge foundation of society for a long time, but hopefully in the new world, that will get redefined in new ways. So I'm not a huge fan of NFTs because they're just another form of ownership. Buy it and sell it, and that's what we're based on. I don't know that humanity has to be based on that.
No,
Uh,
I agree. I think there's, all the economy. There's a book I read years ago called Pulse, where they talk about, how the reason we have crashing economies and that sort of thing is because we break away from the second law of thermodynamics. You can't have increasing value from every transaction. Energy should dissipate, even though it's not lost, but it goes into some other form every time there's a energy transaction. It doesn't stay in its
mhm.
total form. So I totally get that, and I don't like breaking natural laws. My general rule, Mark, is no unnatural acts whenever possible. So, anyway, just some parting thoughts from you about what you hope people, when they read your book, what do they walk away with, and what do they do first after they've read your book?
I think this is the best time for a young person ever to be alive. What I've discovered and what I in my last week in Spain, the young people come and they are suffering in many ways. And we don't pay attention enough to how many ways they are suffering, either because of the family or because of the anxiety or because of what this. We need to find ways to show young people that they have power to alleviate their own suffering and the suffering in the world, and that they can accomplish enormous things that young people at their age could never, ever even dream of doing before, or only dream of doing before. Right now, that power is entering, and it's going to be a long process. It's entering into young people's hands. And I hope they figure out what it is and why they have it, and that they use it wisely for the benefit of everybody.
That's outstanding. I've always appreciated your positive outlook on the human condition, and or as we say here in the Navy, I like the cut of your jib, sir. So keep sailing. And what's the next book?
I'm not sure I think books may have had it. Books are something that, again, is a 20th century artifact. I've discovered that either people don't read books or they read so many books that when you give them a new book, it goes to the bottom of their pile. But,
Yeah, this is
but
my first metaverse book that I wrote in
fabulous.
1995. This is actually the Finnish copy published by Macmillan on VRML. And when I remember right around the turn of this century, I went to back to the publisher and said, "Hey, I've got some new ideas. I want to talk about gaming and serious games and simulation learning." And they said, well, it was after that. It was after Twitter had already started, and they said, how many followers do you have? I'm like, what does that mean? It's early on, and I was early in the social media world. Would read Hoffman investing in my company, and Joey Ito making me get involved in Friendster and Six Apart and all those things. But I didn't. They wanted to see that I had 30,000 Twitter followers before they would consider, regardless of how good my ideas are. They didn't want to see my book until I had 30,000 followers.
And today that has changed. I just was giving someone advice. You can't launch a book without hundreds of reviews on Amazon. And I think, but if I do write something or put it out in whatever form, it will be about empowerment hubs. It will be about the kinds of places, real and virtual, that young people can go to and accomplish things in the world that they never do in school. And some of these exist. There's Scouts, there's 4-H, there's places to do that, but not enough. And so we're going to try to establish them in companies, in schools, wherever possible, so that young people get the kind of encouragement and teamwork and coaching that they can get, that they say get in a first robotics, but that is applied to something useful and helpful in the world.
Outstanding. Well, I hope you and I can collaborate on something one day soon. in this
Oh, and
simulation
let
century.
me add one more
Sure.
thing, because you and I talked about this, and I think it's great. So I was at an ed tech conference, and I said, ed tech, that's just putting out the same content and record keeping and assessment that we've always had. What we need is empotech, empowerment technology. And for those of us and those in your audience and everybody who really wants to create something useful, they will create technologies that empower young people to form the teams, to have the results that will impact the world.
No, that's great. I love that idea. In fact, I was thinking of you just this week. Well, I was think because you asked me to think about the list of technologies I found empowering, and certainly, it was the first iPhone, or even the iPod before that, where I could have all my music in this little tiny box that I could carry with me at all times.
Mhm.
That just blew me away. Then it was the video conferencing, being able to talk to other people in other countries, and even have family in other countries, where you leave the portal open on a Sunday and it's like you're looking into their living room, they're looking into your kitchen. You got to make sure you don't walk by in your underwear, that kind of thing. But where you have that ongoing connection. It's a small thing, but the one thing I saw this week is with my camera on this phone, I can walk through my woods, take a picture of any plant, and then click the information thing, and it'll tell me what that plant is.
Yes.
That used to be a separate application, but now it's all just part of the intelligence of this. And I found this as spring is blooming here and we're heading into summer, incredibly empowering,
And it will
in
listen
my
to a
understanding.
bird and tell you what bird that is. And it
Exactly.
will do all those things. I think that it's just a wonderful, empowered world that we're in, but we have to take it the next step and say, what do we do with this? How do we make people and the world better in the future? And I know we can.
That's a great utility function and a great place to end. Thank you once again, Marc Prensky, for joining us and sharing your thoughts with the Modsim World audience. I will be giving away one of your signed books to the first person that asks a really good, empowering question at the end of this session. So thank you very much, Marc Prensky.
Thank you, Richard. My
Be
pleasure.
well. See you soon.